All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending our first school counselor lunch and learn. We are going to be running this session from 12:30 to 2:30. And to get us started, we are going to do a very quick poll, which Julie's going to launch momentarily. And we're going to give you all 3 minutes to start that. Finish that up, and then we're going to ask all of you to share your information in the chat, your name, your school, your job title. And also, if you could please stay muted during the presentation, we'd really appreciate it. And also, finally, if you haven't noticed already, we are recording because we will share this with your colleagues for anyone who is unable to attend or needs a reminder of what was discussed. And Julie is going to share the poll now. It looks like we have 5 more people to finish. Unless those 5 people are presenters. All right, and that is the end of the poll. So it looks like the majority of people do not have a behavioral health license, and some are working on it. One person does have a license. Looks like everyone feels like they know some of the resources, fair enough. And then regarding being able to make referrals, 25% feel they can do this quickly. 69% it says takes a little time, and then 6% struggle with being able to find those resources. So we're hoping that during this session today, you're going to learn about more of those resources, so you're readily aware of what is available to you and systems that we have that can help you connect with them quickly. So that is really the goal of this event, is to make sure you have all of your tools available to you, especially since this year might be a difficult school year as youth and adults transition back to the classroom and campus. So that is what we're going to be doing today. So really quickly, we're going to look at the agenda, if Julie doesn't mind sharing it. Slightly out of order, Julie, sorry. Okay, so we'll be doing presentations from 12:40 to 2:05. We're going to be talking about trauma-informed care for Native youth with Linda Kinsey. Oh, this is slightly out of order now. We'll first be talking about ACEs education and awareness, then trauma-informed Care for Native Youth, Vaping, Tobacco Cessation, and PAC's Good Behavior Game, LGBTQ plus Needs, and Center for Mental Health Services, mental health and suicide prevention training that I offer through my program here at Lewis and Clark Public Health. Julie will be talking about the Connect referral system and 2-on-1. Bob Funk from the Awareness Network will share about the Awareness Network, and then we'll hear from Shodair and Youth Dynamics. We'll finish up our session with a few discussion questions and just some general Q&A and a few final words. Other things that you should know about is that this is not obviously an exhaustive list of different resources and services that are available in the community, but Julie has put together a lovely resource sheet that we're going to be sharing with all of you. And she also holds monthly lunch and learn meetings to expand knowledge of various resources. So you are always welcome to jump on those. And then also, if you have any ideas for resources that we haven't covered or not listed in the resource sheet, please feel free to share them in the chat box. Julie, is there anything I missed? All righty, so we are going to kick off presentations with Rebecca Hargis from Elevate Montana, who will be talking about ACEs education and awareness. Thank you, everyone.
Well, if I can get it to unmute. Hi, I'm Rebecca Hargis. I'm the chair of the Helena affiliate of Elevate Montana. And we're all about educating the community about adverse childhood experiences and how to mitigate it with resilience and connection. So what we do is we try to spread awareness of these things through trainings, through presentations, and you can actually make a referral through Connect for individuals, families, groups that want trainings or presentations. Those referrals come to me, and then we look at what's desired and what people want. What I'm here, and our mission, our goal is to create a more resilient community by reducing adverse childhood experiences in the Helena community. And what I'm here to talk to you about today, do you have the photo to share? Is we have a bunch of posters, and they are Resilience Trumps ACEs posters. This comes from the Resilience Initiative, and their website is on the poster. And any of you school counselors, if you would like one of these posters for your office, for the entire office, please contact me and I will get one to you. We would like to get them up in all the school counselors' offices. We'd like to get them up in pediatricians' offices and other locations that we've identified in the Helena community. So just a little bit about this poster is there was a deck of cards that were created called Resilience Trumps ACEs. 42 of the cards are resilience cards, and 10 of them portray the 10 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that were identified in the original ACE study. So what it is intended to do is to promote conversation about resilience, about ACEs, about how ACEs affect kids' lives, families' lives, parents' lives. So if anybody wants a poster for their office, please contact me. I understand that we are on the resource list. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. And just a quick reminder, I don't know that I actually told you all this. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We will address them at the Q&A at the end of this session. Also, Taylor is going to be managing the chat box, so she has answers to your questions immediately. She can go ahead and share that information. All right, so the next person we're going to have share some information is Linda Kinsey. She is the grant manager for the Native Connections grant through Helena Indian Alliance, and she's going to talk to everyone about trauma-informed care for Native youth.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you today. I'm Linda Kinsey, and I'm, like Jess said, I work at the Helena Indian Alliance as the director of the Native Connections grant, which is the SAMHSA grant. SAMHSA is the acronym for Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration at the federal level. And our goal is to provide some research and some suicide prevention throughout the Helena Indian Alliance community. Maybe I'll just touch a little bit about myself. I'm from Fort Belknap, Montana, enrolled member of the Aani, which is the White Clay people of the Plains tribes. I have my master's degree in school guidance and counseling. I was formerly licensed as a licensed addictions counselor, and I've done a lot of work and research on trauma, especially relating to Native populations, Native families, Native communities, and have implemented a lot of the training that I kind of just doing a 101 with you today, maybe a pre-101 on some resources and maybe some just some general information about trauma as it relates to Native American students. In Helena, we've received some recent data from the census, the 20 census that we just passed here last year. And it indicates for Helena that we have about 800 Native American families in the Helena area. And so what that translates into students is, I'm not sure. I'm sure OPI has that more relevant data and more current data. And so I want to just talk a little bit about trauma. So I found out that the word trauma comes from the Greek language. I can't say that word, what in the Greek language, but it translates to in English to wound. And indeed, in our indigenous language, we translate trauma into wound, but we add spirit towards it, a wounded spirit situation. And so some of the things that we can do specifically about recognizing and being trauma informed in regards to all students, but specifically Native students, is to do your own research, do your own. So the Office of Public Instruction website has very, very good resources on what is normally called, or what we refer to in Montana as IFA. IFA is the acronym for Indian Education for All, in which it was a really a legislative effort by Indian educators across Montana, and also interested individuals to get some cultural
Linda, I think you got muted again.
Sorry, I'm having all kinds of technical issues today. Our server at the Helena Indian Alliance is down, so I couldn't share my screens. My phone just rings anyway, so I'm having a little bit of minor traumas. But anyways, I just wanted to maybe share a little bit about my own personal experiences. Working in the public school system as an Indian parent and sending my kids into the public school system. So I began my teaching career in 1983, and I taught 5th grade in a small, Class B school, North Central Montana. We had about, I want to say I had about 17 students in my classroom. And I was one of the, I believe one of the first Native teachers in our school district. Although Harlem School District borders the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, historically we had no Native teachers on staff there. And Harlem wavers between the high 80s to 100% Native students. And so that's where I first started teaching 5th grade in Harlem. And it was also the school that I attended growing up. And so I think it was maybe about a week or two into that, for being a first-year teacher, I was walking the hallways, and I noticed a little girl with her teacher standing outside the classroom. And so, of course, you know, Harlem being a small area, small town, everybody pretty much knew everybody. So I knew that little girl, and she was also a relative of mine. And she was, I think she was like 1st grade, possibly kindergarten or 2nd grade. I don't really remember, you know, for sure. But what I do remember is that the teacher was a male teacher. He was hollering at her. The door was closed. He was standing outside of the classroom, and she was a little Native girl, and she had her head down. And he was saying, "Look at me. I told you to look at me. You need to look at me when you're speaking." And she just had her head down. And so I observed that, and I immediately went to the principal's office, you know, out of concern, because the principal had been my principal when I was in school. And I sat with him and I told him how upset I was, and that I really think our teachers need to learn about culture and our Native culture, and eye contact, and hollering too. You know, hollering is not just bad for the Native students. Of course, we know it's bad for all students to holler and express anger while we're trying to discipline and interact with our students. And so we had that conversation, and of course the principal was aware of some of the nuances and some of the cultural aspects of eye contact. And I'll just maybe speak a little bit towards eye contact in Native cultures. And so I grew up exclusively in the Native culture, and we did not make eye contact with even our close relatives. And in some circumstances, in some instances, we did, yes. But generally, as a general rule across the board, we did very little direct eye contact, and not for very long. And so there's differences in opinion behind this. And a lot of it comes from respect. If a Native student is not showing eye contact, it's not necessarily disrespect, but rather respect. You know, respect for those that are above us, those that are close to us, and just respect for, it goes deeper than that, about spiritual understanding with eye contact. And so, but just generally, I wanted to share that and so on my visit with the principal, we decided that it was time for our school district to do PIR days for instructional staff, and indeed all staff, about number one, the local history given by local people of our 2 tribes that reside on the Fort Belknap Reservation, and indeed in general the Plains Indian historical understanding of the Plains Indian. And so that started, gosh, that was in 1983, and we developed our PRR days for orientation for all staff that following fall, where we did include that in our teacher orientation. And I believe it's really essential to understand not only Native children cultures, but diversity in general. In fact, I think in the updated school curriculum for school guidance counselors, they've included diversity counseling as part of the general curriculum. It wasn't there when I graduated. I graduated from MSU Northern, which used to be Northern Montana College in Havre, and we didn't have diversity as a general requirement or even as an elective. And so, you know, it's really important to understand diverse cultures, especially our primary culture, or our primary racial group here in Montana, of our Native people students. And so that was just one instance that we solved it by expressing what the problem was, and then discerning how we could do, and certainly by education on our non-Native and Native instructional staff on some cultures and mores regarding interacting with students and certainly interacting with diverse cultures. Another experience I'd like to share with you about is when my own oldest son, who's 41 now, went into kindergarten in that same public school and with the same teacher I had in third grade. So she was an experienced educator and experienced in teaching Native students, but she still had some lessons to learn. And so we were having family day and or, you know, like getting to know the teacher day and to getting to know the classroom day, the first day of school. And so I went in with my son and the teacher had some displays on her. She was getting ready for like displaying Columbus Day and, you know, some holidays and some, you know, landmarks in history, I guess, in American history for her students. And she had a sailboat up there on her shelf. It was just a regular plain sailboat with the white canvas sail on it. And my son came in and he goes, "Mom, it's a teepee." You know, in his perspective and his understanding of the world, he thought that that's the canvas thing of the sailboat was a teepee. And of course, in our household, we never discussed Columbus. We barely probably, you know, discussed sailboats. And, you know, we're probably about as assimilated as anybody else, but that just wasn't a topic of conversation in our home. However, you know, we'd had attended many ceremonies and cultures, you know, outside of school in our home reservation and certainly around the state. And his understanding of that white canvas sailboat was a teepee. And so the teacher, you know, was pretty concerned because she saw that my son saw that her sailboat in his understanding was a teepee. And so she talked about that concern after the visit and thought maybe he should get tested, thought maybe he should get his eyes checked. And, you know, that kind of really started my concern and worry that, you know, we need to have our kids understood, you know, and we need to have not only with Native cultures, but different paradigms, different perspectives. And so, you know, and then, so we look at trauma in general. So trauma, we categorize it historical trauma, you know, historic trauma. And so before trauma-informed care became like a popular term or a popular subject for further study or further research, we in the late 80s and maybe into the 90s, we called it intergenerational anger and shame. You know, not only related to Native people, but all trauma in general. And then it moved into the trauma-informed care or trauma, you know, historic trauma. And so specifically with Native people, you know, we want to understand what their history has been. You know, certainly in Montana, we have seen 1864. I'll just want to tell you that 1864 was the first boarding school in Montana. It was close to us on the Flathead Reservation. And so historically, between 1864 and even continuing today, there are government boarding schools, Catholic boarding schools scattered throughout the United States. And I think, you know, we could all learn from that history of the boarding schools. I'll share with you that my grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, my mother, who was born in 1926, both full from the Grovant tribe, the Ani tribe, all received their education in boarding schools. And so I was the first female of my immediate family to get a public education. And so that history has to be realized, that there are still some lingering effects from those boarding school days, you know, separation from culture, separation from, you know, language, separation from family. And that still has some effects today on some families. And, you know, as with everything, all subject matters, we shouldn't stereotype, because all families weren't affected by boarding school education systems. But I can tell you probably about 80% of Native families have been, maybe even higher, have been affected by boarding school. And so you know, the boarding school, like I said, system is still prevalent in today's world. And so when we look at, you know, for me, I've only been in the urban setting for about 8 years. I've exclusively lived, worked, and interacted with my home reservation in north central Montana. That doesn't mean I never seen the rest of the world, or I just chose to, you know, live there. And I've done some you know, like training and consulting and workshops for OPI and for different organizations regarding trauma. And it gets pretty specific and in depth and tailored to the specific audience. And so I would just encourage school staff, everybody to just expand that knowledge, really look at that IFA, the Indian Education for All. There is some resources there, you know, regarding you know, the history of Montana Indians and getting to know. In Helena here, from what I understand, we do have representation from at all the tribes in Montana. And so, you know, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about the map of Montana in our general knowledge. So close to us here would be the Blackfoot Reservation, and where the Blackfoot tribe resides, and then Flathead Reservation, where 2 tribes reside. And so those are 2 very different tribes. One is a coastal tribe, you know, the Salish tribes, and then the Blackfeet are plains tribes. And so those are some differences that, as we look into just some general education about natives in Montana, we can explore those differences. And then we move over north from Browning, we have Rocky Boy, which is the smallest tribe in Montana, which is the Chippewa Cree tribe. And so, and then we move farther, a little bit north and then east is Fort Belknap, which is comprised of 2 tribes. Then we go even farther east is Fort Peck, which is also 2 tribes. And we go a little bit, or a lot south, which is Northern Cheyenne and you know, the Crow tribes. So that general understanding, I really believe that will help us all understand some of that trauma, you know. And then the other part of understanding culture, education, history, and dealing with Native families, and certainly Native curriculum, and certainly implementing it, would be looking at federal policies, federal Indian policies in specific. Maybe some of you don't know that before, but prior to the Bureau, BIA, we call it the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it used to be called the War Department. And so the government office first associated with interacting with Native Americans was called the War Department. And so that, you know, moved into what we call the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, and then certainly tribal governments, and the understanding that tribal governments are sovereign governments. And so I just want to say that, you know, my perspective comes a lot from the tribal perspective, also from a former clinician. You know, I dealt a lot with mental health and substance use disorders in families, and, you know, and helping them to understand root causes, you know, root causes of addiction, root causes of mental illness. And some of them could all be traced back to historical trauma, you know, if you will, generational shame and anger, you know, general trauma, and then current trauma. And then, so, you know, prioritizing on today's world and today's, you know, what's going on today. I believe, you know, if I were still working in the public school system as a school counselor or school administrator or teacher, whatever, whatever the case may be, I would probably want to prioritize on current issues, you know, things like COVID, things like helping students, certainly, and then families, and then even ourselves, you know, deal with this very uneven waters or uncertain waters of the pandemic, and all the issues regarding masking, regarding vaccination, all those things. But, you know, the bottom line, I really believe is self-care as well. You know, no matter if we're, you know, whatever background we have, whatever, you know, nationality or race, that the bottom line for all of us to help heal with our own traumas, with family trauma, certainly to help others heal, is self-care and understanding our own limitations and our own wellness and health. And we always used to say in the treatment setting that we really can't give what we don't have to give, you know. So for those of you that are getting ready to prepare for school or maybe already doing school, I really, really wish you the best, you know, and that we could all look towards our future, look towards educating our children, and look towards treating one another good. You know, in our language, we always greet each other and with a greeting, and also, you know, a salutary thing. And what it really means is wishing each other long life, good health, and good relationships. And so that's what my wish is for all of us. And I guess we have a little bit of time maybe for some questions. I know I had some nice slides. They were pretty. They were purple and pinkish and white, and they were nice. But you know, it didn't work out where our server couldn't access those slides today. So I'm doing my best on my little cell phone here, and you know, just encourage you all to look up those. There's even a YouTube presentation. There might be several, but I did see one about specifically the Native American trauma, you know, and the history and some of the after effects. And you know, I guess since we're in a pandemic, I'll tell you that my tribe, specifically the Grovant tribe, the Aani, suffered several pandemics in our history. And in the early 1900s, out of tens of thousands of tribal members, we had a census of about 300 to 500 because of smallpox and tuberculosis. And so just remember that tribes in their most somewhat recent history have experienced pandemics, you know, in their family, knowing family members that have passed away. And I'll tell you another thing, a local family here in Helena experienced tragic losses last January, I believe it was. These are urban Indians, but we know them. They lost a mother, two sisters, and an uncle, all elderly, 60 and over, all within 2.5 months from COVID. And so we know that our Native people are adversely affected by this COVID pandemic and are seeing death rates at 2 and 3 times higher, even in urban populations. And so, you know, taking into account, our students may be experiencing, you know, that compounded grief, you know, or that compounded loss, losing elders like this. And I think I better stop because, you know, like I said, trauma can really get extended out. It could really involve a lot of topics, a lot of issues, and a lot of avenues. And so I'll just leave it there. And maybe if you have questions, I could try to answer, or if there's some conversation that we might want to further on. And, you know, like I said, good luck on your upcoming school year. And, you know,
Thank you, Linda. You know, with your slides, even though you weren't able to show them here, we can definitely embed them into the slideshow that we're going to be sharing with everyone. So they'll have that. Also, if there are any links that you would like to share in terms of IEFA or anything that you would like our counselors to go visit, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we can also put them in our resource sheet.
okay.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much for sharing, Linda. Did you want to take questions now? Because we were planning on taking most of them later, but if, you know, if now is a good time, we can also do that.
However you want to do that.
Any questions from our attendees? All right, well, barring any, since we're not hearing any questions, if you have any at the end of the presentation, that works too. Again, thank you, Linda. And the next presentation is going to be from Zach Coe and Taylor Dinsdale. Zach is with Youth Connections and Taylor is our tobacco preventionist. And they're going to be talking about vaping, tobacco cessation for youth, and the PAC's Good Behavior Game.
Hi, everyone. I know I've spoken with some of you already, but like Jess said, I'm here. If I worked with you last year, I used to be with Youth Connections. So Zach has done a wonderful job taking over for me there, and I now do tobacco prevention and vaping. So a large part of prevention with youth is or youth activities. We try to get out there as much as possible, and as much as you guys will let us in there with the schools. We love to do stuff for Red Ribbon Week, those big days of action, as well as stuff outside the schools like park cleanups and things like that. And we also, prevention really focuses on evidence-based programs. So I know it's on there to talk about PACs a little bit. Hopefully if you're an elementary school counselor or principal and you're on here, you're somewhat familiar with it, but it's important for us as substance use prevention folks, because that leads to those lesser instances of substance use as those kids grow older. So PACS has had remarkable outcomes. It's very evidence-based, as well as helping with substance use later on in life. It also helps with classroom management. It lowers stress on teachers. It leads to higher academic outcomes, higher graduation rates. So it's a really wonderful program, and I hope they were able to kind of start what they started last year with, expanding that to all the schools. That also ties in with Zach and I, because we are trained to provide the PACS tools training. So what that does is it trains community members in a lot of the PACS good behavior game practices. So those who interact with kids outside of schools, like parents, bus drivers, after school programs, babysitters, I mean, anybody, they're just getting that common language and that reinforcement outside of school. So it's a really great program. If you have any questions, or I know counselors are always looking for stuff for parents. If you guys would like to try to do some PACS community tools trainings for your parents, we would love to help you out with that. The other part of my job, in addition to prevention, is cessation. So I've heard from a ton of different schools for middle and high school that you're seeing more and more kids vaping, that it's a big issue in the schools. I'll let Zach talk about his project with that, but I also have a lot of information on My Life, My Quit. So that is the Quit Lines version for youth. So I'll put the link in the chat for you guys, but it's just mylifemyquit.com. It's confidential, so the students don't have to get permission from their parents. They can text, they can chat online. It's confidential for them if they're afraid they're going to get in trouble or something. But it's a really great resource to help the kids quit, or if they need to talk to somebody because they want to quit. It's a great resource, and I have tons and tons of paper materials like brochures and posters. If you guys want any of those for your schools, also please let me know. And then just a few other things. If you're with the high school, you've probably seen our contest the last, I don't know how many years. We do an art contest every year for either billboards, or this year it was social media ads, to get those messages out there to students. And so I'm applying for the grant this year. We plan on doing that again. So I'll send it to you guys if you could send it to your students to get participation in that. It always has, we have amazing outcomes every year. And I'm asking for a little more this year, so we can maybe incorporate some alternative activities as well for either Red Ribbon Week or World No Tobacco Day or Kick Butts Day, things like that. And then just today I found out that, I don't know if you've heard about it or not, but OPI is also giving out, they have a lot of grants they want to give out for tobacco prevention, so tobacco or vaping. They're aware that the schools have gotten a lot of money through the pandemic, but this money would be specifically towards tobacco prevention, and they're really looking for people to apply for those grants. So if you'd like more information on that too, I could get you that. I think that's everything on my list, so I'll pass it to Zach to see what he has to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. So as Taylor mentioned, I'm kind of the person who is in her previous position. Luckily, I had a very good foundation to work upon. So from my predecessor. And yeah, a lot of what I'll be saying will sound pretty similar to what was Taylor was saying. I can start by kind of telling you Youth Connections mission statement, which is we support agencies and businesses to offer positive activities so kids and youth aren't involved in negative ones. We support mentoring relationships because research shows it keeps kids in schools and helps them become successful. We support classroom education. Obviously, PACS is one very good example of that. And of course, we support adults who support the children. So we like to be kind of all-encompassing. We love to collaborate. We like data. We like programs, resources, and evidence-based programs. So that's a little more about Youth Connections. I can certainly share the link to our website. And as far as PACs go, Taylor obviously mentioned that before and did an excellent job. One thing I really like to mention about it, I recently did the training, and so it's pretty fresh in my mind. They were very much stressing the fact that it was tools and not kind of a way to go about mentoring and parenting. And I think that's worth mentioning again. It's an example they used for us. It wasn't they're telling you how to build your house. They're giving you the tools to build the house the way you want it. So it's very, I think flexible and helpful for parents as a way to incorporate their own, ethics, morals, and style of parenting. So I'm very much a huge proponent of that. And finally, we work on, various projects. Taylor designed a escape room that kind of educates on the merits of healthy living and, substance abuse prevention. And kind of continuing with that, I've reached out to some of you with this program. We're trying to see, a reduced amount of vaping in schools and just the general Helena community at the moment. So kind of come up with a disposal system using these kind of mock trash receptacles to be able to toss the various vaping jewels and apparatus into with and using programs like My Life, My Quit to encourage further, prevention of that kind of growing, I don't want to call it an epidemic, but growing issue in the community. And I have a lot of information about that I can also pass along, but we always try to encourage things in a very positive light. We're not trying to, invade on anybody's, way of life. We just want to be very positive and encourage healthy living. So that's a little bit about Youth Connections. And I can take any questions at the end. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Anything else that you'd like to add, Taylor or Zach? Alrighty, great. So next up is Alex Holter with the Center for Mental Health, and he's going to talk to us about center services and LGBTQ needs.
Awesome, thank you. So like Jess said, I'm Alex Holter. I'm an outpatient therapist with the Center for Mental Health. I work with both kids and adults. So I'll take kiddos age 4 on up. We do take kids as well in general here at the center for our outpatient program. We do have more youth services in Great Falls, and we're hoping to get more built up here as well, like case management and home support as well. But my primary topic today is I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the LGBTQ community and kind of give like a basic introduction, kind of like the speed version of all this information here. If I could get the next slide, that'd be awesome. So a little bit about myself. So I have my Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology, and I have an emphasis in sex research or sex therapy research and clinical counseling. I am also an out trans therapist. So I work as an out therapist, meaning I am very open. It's actually on our center website that I am openly trans. So that way the LGBT community knows that there is somebody out there who is in their community taking clients. And I work with all ages in this community as well, whether it's for sexuality, orientation, anything really, but not just focusing on that. So if I can get the next slide, Julie. So we'll kind of talk first by giving you some introductions. I'm sure a lot of you guys know, so sex is different than gender. Sex is usually what is assigned at birth, right? That's what a doctor puts on your birth certificate. It's based off of what genitals you're born with and usually what chromosomes you're born with. So this is usually where it's believed to be biological. So sometimes people's sex don't match their gender. So gender is a social construct, meaning it is a lot more complex than sex. Gender is something that can be fluid. It can be, thought of as like societal expectations, as well as how we think of somebody should act or behave based on their assigned sex at birth. So it's a lot more multifaceted. I'm sure in the schools, you guys hear all these new terms coming out because the terms are changing constantly. So, there's all these new gender terms coming out, and it's important to know that when they're talking about these gender terms, they may be exploring, they may know, but whatever it is, it's just knowing that, okay, they know their gender. So if we can go on to the next slide here. And when we're talking about these different genders, it's important to know that transgender is an umbrella term that covers these other gender identities. So when someone says they're transgender, that doesn't necessarily mean they're transitioning from male to female or female to male. It could mean like they're non-binary, like they're genderqueer, they could have these other meanings. And just like how cisgender is an umbrella term to describe men and women who are born and identify with the sex they were born with. But it's also important to know this doesn't cover everybody, right? I mean, we heard a little bit earlier about trauma with our Native families, and there's different cultural things to experience and know with that as well. Things like two-spirit, or with the Samoan tribes, I can never fafafahine, meaning it's the way of the woman. So there's so many different examples where gender is so different than the Western idea. So when sometimes you hear like, well, that's a boy thing and that's a girl thing, it's like, maybe that's more of the societal view. But then we add other things onto sex and gender, so it gets more confusing. We add, if we could go to the next slide, we add things like sexuality. So this is who you're attracted to and who you like and who you love. There's people though that fall outside of this spectrum, because there's people, there's terms that people hear like lesbian and gay man and bi and pansexual, but there's also like people that have no attraction to anyone, or they have romantic attraction only. So there's all these different things out there. And when I say things are on a spectrum, I literally mean they're on a spectrum. It ranges so much and far between that no one's going to fall exactly the same place. And then you kind of add them all together. So this is one of my favorite tools to use to explain gender identity, sex, gender expression, like a physical attraction, emotional attraction, things like that, because this just breaks it down in so much easier way to kind of explain it to people and even to parents, because it's hard to understand how each thing is separate, because your gender expression may not match what your gender is. Like you may present yourself as more feminine when you're a man. You may present yourself as more masculine when you're a woman. So knowing this identity piece and how and where people fall, it's really important, and it's very, very central to mental health and well-being. Because when we have that and we know that, it can offer that support. But that's why people who identify as an alternate gender or trans, they may feel they have to hide, especially in schools, so they can avoid things like judgment, persecution by their peers, and their own families. And, you know, anyone, right? They don't want to have that question of, well, why do you get to use this other bathroom? So that a lot of people choose to hide. But there's some consequences to that. So specifically with those struggling with gender identity, gender dysphoria can be a consequence, meaning you just kind of have this huge like emotional distress and physical about not matching how you feel and identify. You have an increased risk of mental health concerns. You can feel isolated, high risk of suicide, and an increase of substance abuse. So it's important to kind of check in with those kiddos. You know, if you notice they're isolating, just kind of, even if they don't want to tell you, just checking in, because it could be something where they're not feeling safe. But there's benefits too to coming out, whether it's coming out just to somebody at school, and I don't want to say just, because, you know, teachers and counselors are very important people for this community. Because then you get the support in a very important place in your life. It helps increase, you know, the positive aspects of your mental health, and people can start living congruently to who they are. And it's so important, because that also then reduces risk of substance abuse and suicide. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So some things that you guys can do, and this is just showing passive support. So it's not even things you have to necessarily, you know, parade around. You can just add pronouns to your email signature. Super easy. People may have questions and ask why you're doing that. And then you can explain, well, I'm doing this so that way people feel comfortable. Because, you know, you may actually work with somebody in the LGBT community and not even know, because they may not want to say anything because they don't know who's safe. So it's not just for our youth, it's for our teachers as well. And normalize introducing yourself with your pronouns. Even though it may seem kind of silly, sometimes, you know, when you walk up to a new student, you can just say, hi, my name is Alex, and I go by he, him, his pronouns, male pronouns. And using more gender inclusive language like y'all. I mean, I know it's kind of fun, but, you know, using things like that instead of you guys, just because that way it's a little bit more inclusive. But even just having posters, showing books, you know, having an I am an ally sticker, any little thing like that can make a huge difference in an LGBT youth's life and in adults' life. Because I can tell you that when you see that, you know that, okay, if I need to, that person is safe. Can we go to the next slide? So a little bit, just especially for counselors, because, you know, you guys get sometimes kids that, you know, they need to just get stuff out. And if they come out to you, the best thing you can do is just thank them, right? Because they trusted you in that moment. Don't out them to anybody without their permission. Even other coworkers. Like, you make sure, like, hey, can I talk to, you know, the principal about this, so that way we can make sure that you're safe, and kind of going through and letting them know that even though it's not therapy, it could be a place for them to come and explore their pronouns and their names, and discuss who and where they want to use their pronouns and names with. Do they want all the teachers to know? Do they not? Like, what is safe? Because you technically do not have to tell parents, especially because if there's a risk of homelessness or rejection, you got to make sure they're safe. As I'm sure you guys all know, that's the main thing with being in the schools, right? It's their safety. So knowing that is important. And yeah, so same thing, right? Kind of similar stuff, because if teachers come to you and say, hey, I had this kid come out to me, what resources, you can just say, hey, let's actually, you know, instead of us talking about it, let's talk to the kiddo with this. Right? We want to discuss the safety. We want to discuss all this stuff, and to make sure, especially teachers, because I know with teachers and counselors alike, you guys have a lot on your plates. I know my dad's a teacher at Helena High, and he's had kids come out to him and he's like, I want to be there for them, but it's really hard because I have to go to the next class. But just acknowledging that for them and saying, you know what, I want to talk more about this. Thank you for coming out to me, but I have to move on to the next class. Just that moment of acknowledgement means so much. All right, if we can go to the next slide. So these are just some references and things that I've used. There are more resources. A lot of them, unfortunately, are online. There are, of course, I know in the high school, some GSAs, and I know Shodair has a group going and such. I'm hoping to get another group going as well eventually here, depending on COVID, unfortunately. But there are also lists coming out and being posted on websites. As soon as they're posted, I'll make sure to get them to Julie, for therapists and other mental health professionals in the LGBT community who are open and working with this community. Because this is a very special area for me, and it's a very important area for me. So I will do as many talks and things as needed to get this information out there. But yeah, that's kind of just a basic rundown of this. There's always more, of course, to learn. But I look forward to at the end if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Alex. That was really excellent. Like Alex said, we will save questions till the end, but feel free to put them in the chat box now so that we make sure we get to them. So the next speaker is actually going to be me. I am Jess Hegstrom, the Suicide Prevention Coordinator at Lewis and Clark Public Health. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of suicide lately, as well as tools that we are offering through Lewis and Clark Public Health. So my contact information is right there, but we will share the slides, and it's also on the resource sheet that Julie has provided already in the chat box. And maybe we'll share again at some point if you do not mind. All right, so go ahead for the next slide, please. So most of these facts, if not all of them, should be pretty familiar with you all, but we know that mental health challenges onset often happens during youth. So we want to catch these things as early as possible. So 50% of all mental health challenges onset by age of 14, 75% by age of 24. So schools are working with youth at a point where they are running into these situations. So we want to make sure you have every tool at your disposal to help. So we know 1 in every 4 to 5 youth in the general population meet criteria for a lifetime mental disorder. We also know the earlier they receive treatment, the better the outcome they're going to have. They will learn coping mechanisms, they will gain supports in their lives. They will start learning how to manage their mental health challenge, because as we know, having a mental health challenge is certainly not a death sentence, just like having diabetes isn't a death sentence. If you take care of yourself and you know how to, you can live a perfectly normal, decent, happy, productive life. You just got to take care of yourself. We also know there's an increased likelihood of recovery / improved treatment rate with a mixture of medication, therapy, and self-help and other support strategies. And I find that that last piece is one that often falls to the side. We always think of medication and therapy, and those are certainly good things, especially if they're together. You have a higher treatment rate with both. But what other strategies can be implemented to make a young person's life easier, especially if you're running into situations where maybe you can't get a young person into therapy immediately, but you could look at things to make their lives easier. And we find that out by actually having that conversation with a young person, identifying their strengths and applying those, finding out things that they're interested in that will make them feel successful, connected with others, give them a chance to breathe and a moment away from whatever is bothering them. So it's really important that we apply those things as well as our traditional resources of medication and therapy. So really, we want to look at the whole picture. And this is something that we really discuss at length in the youth mental health first aid training that I will talk about in a little bit. We also know that youth are at a higher risk of suicide due to just the natural adolescent development. They're naturally more impulsive. They're very much influenced by their peers. If they're dealing with a mental health challenge, they don't necessarily understand what they're experiencing. They might even think that they're bad people who somehow brought this on themselves, when that's not the case. Also, symptoms of mental health challenges present differently in youth than they do in adults, especially depression. For example, for young people, a lot of times it expresses itself as anger, irritability, impulsivity, rather than someone just looking sad in bed, right? So we just want to make sure that we're all aware of different signs that a kiddo might be dealing with something so it can be managed early. We also know about 86% of parents who lost a kiddo to suicide never knew that their young person had depression. So again, we want to nip these things in the bud. And I know that you all were working very hard to do that. But again, we want to just give you a few extra tools. And if you haven't taken youth mental health first aid, it uses a really cool framework that's just another approach toward mental health for youth. And what's great about youth mental health first aid is it's an early intervention program, but it also is good for crisis situations. We also know that kids are dealing with a lot of stress, just in general, figuring out who they are, making decisions about long-term, going to college, picking their major, getting a job for the first time, like all the things that are happening as they get older, they have more responsibilities. And then with COVID, of course, we're seeing some more stress along those lines. Adolescent mental health concerns have increased during the pandemic. They've dealt with a year of isolation, as you all know. Some of them may have some pretty rusty social skills. They might be experiencing social anxiety as they transfer back in. Transitions are hard for people in general, so that can also present difficulties. They might have some academic concerns. Maybe the last school year was not as productive as maybe we would have liked, but we were dealing with unprecedented times. So they might have some difficulties as they transition back, and that also can impact how they feel about themselves. And then also through the pandemic, we've seen an increase in symptoms. We've also seen people developing mental health challenges that they didn't have before. Next slide, please. So more on that. So nationally, the CDC reported that they saw a 51% increase in teenage girls visiting emergency departments for suspected suicide attempts. So we know that, again, that there is an increasing need. We cannot say that COVID means suicide, but we can definitely say that COVID does impact mental health because of the different social changes that we've had to deal with. So anyway, on that, so in 2019, we lost more than 500 kids to suicide between the ages of 10 to 14, and this is all pre-COVID. There were almost 6,000 suicides by people 15 to 24 years old that year. We also know most adolescent suicide attempts are precipitated by interpersonal conflicts. Suicide is the leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. Only accidents occur more often. Well, no, let me rephrase that. The second next thing is accidents. And then, as I mentioned, we have seen an increase in ED visits, including at St. Peter's Health. I'm not authorized to release the exact information or numbers, but we have seen a jump. So kids are certainly dealing with some hard things right now. Next slide, please. So bouncing off of Alex's presentation earlier, we know our LGBTQ youth are at an increased risk for suicide, especially if they come from highly rejecting families. That's why it's so important to make sure that families have education and also the adults that are in other parts of their lives are supportive to make up for some of that. And if Alex, if there's any point you want to jump in, feel free on this slide. The perception of being different in some communities may lead to isolation. Family rejection can lead to higher rates of depression, homelessness, increased substance use, and risky sexual behaviors. I think with substance use, a big thing to remember here is that when people are hurting, they find ways to kill the pain. You know, human beings have found, have been self-medicating for a very, very long time. Think about the lotus eaters in the Odyssey. So, you know, it's not unusual for people to take up these maladaptive behaviors as a way to cope with what they're dealing with. And then the other thing to know, and Alex mentioned this as well, is that there are support programs for school staff to help our LGBTQIA youth. Trevor Ally trainings, Trevor Care trainings, there's the GSAs. There's a bunch of other things that I'm missing in addition to the Trevor text line, chat, and Trevor text. Anything else you want to add, Alex?
I mean, like there's the Trans Lifeline, there's the HRC, there's quite a few places, and Safe Space is also a really great training. It just kind of helps give you resources as an ally. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And also one thing that the Suicide Prevention Coalition for Lewis and Clark County has written into its strategic plan is helping to provide some of this education for the community and schools. So if you are interested in learning more, we'd be happy to get you that education. So, next slide, please. Thank you, Alex. All right, so next thing, and this again shouldn't be surprising. So for that 2019 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 10% of Montana high school students attempted suicide one or more times. That's more than 4,000 kids. 15.6% of 7th and 8th graders attempted. That's more than 3,300. And then specifically for our county in 2019, remember this is all pre-COVID, 42.3% of students said they felt sad, so sad or hopeless for every day for 2 weeks that they started to drop their usual activities. Dropping activities is a huge warning sign. It's normal for kids to replace one activity for another because they're forming their identities. They're figuring out who they are. And again, maybe their friends are going into theater and they want to try it too. But if they drop all of their activities, that is very concerning. 28.9% seriously considered attempting suicide and 13.4% actually attempted. So again, these things are certainly happening in our community and we're all aware of that. Next slide, please. So to try and answer some of these challenges in our community, Lewis and Clark Public Health Suicide Prevention Program has a 3-year grant from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration to provide free education to every sector of the community. Our primary focus is medical and mental health providers, and then first responders, but we really want to make sure everyone and anyone has this education. So we offer QPR, which is a program that probably a lot of you are familiar with. It's a 1.5 to 2 hour program. It's really the very basics of suicide and how to help. So very similar to CPR, except it's focused on suicide prevention. Training for this program is really only good for a year, maybe 2 years if you really want to squint, but we'd love to get you regular education on QPR. We also have youth mental health first aid. It is an 8-hour program, but can be split into halves or into quarters to make it reasonable for staff to attend. There's also a virtual component. So that version is 6.5 hours total. 2 of those hours are self-paced education, and then the rest is facilitated. I highly suggest this program because it really helps adults to tell the difference between what is normal adolescent development and what is a burgeoning or existing mental health challenge, because it is very difficult for adults to tell the difference. Obviously, you all work with youth, so you're probably more in tune, but again, we want to make sure you have just extra tools in your tool belt. So great training, and it's actually a lot of fun if you ask me. Applied suicide intervention skills training. I know all of you have this. If you're looking for an update or if you're interested in becoming a trainer, that's something we can certainly talk about. And then we're also doing counseling on access to lethal means. So there's a program through the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and it's all about helping providers to navigate conversations with others about locking up medication and firearms to make sure that a person who's struggling with their mental health in the household does not have access, because access is a really important piece of the suicide story. And I'll talk more about that. It is offered online. And if we receive our next grant that we're waiting to hear about any day now, we will actually be training in person, providing this education so everyone has these tools. Because if you have a kiddo who is experiencing suicidal ideation, you absolutely want to make sure that means are locked up, that they don't have access, because again, they're very impulsive. And a lot of times for just people in general, the time between the decision to make an attempt and an actual attempt is 5 minutes to an hour. So if they don't have access in that moment of acute crisis, we're just so much more likely to save them and to see them the next day. We're also doing training on adverse childhood experiences through Rebecca Hargis. Rebecca is no longer here, but thank you, Rebecca. And then we also have a military cultural awareness training called Military Strong that I'll talk about shortly. Just so you know, if you have a behavioral health license, if you take any of this training through us, that will count for your Department of Labor and Industry requirement. You are asked to have 2 hours of suicide prevention training annually. We are happy to make sure that those needs are met for all of you. Next slide, please. Military Strong. So this is an online self-paced training. It's our third year for the program. We have 57 organizations who have completed the training. We'd really like to see these schools included because a large part of our population is service members, veterans, and their families. Just veterans is 11% of our community. Obviously, we have Fort Harrison and the VA in our backyard. So we do see a lot of service members, and we have a lot of kiddos who identify with that population. So we want to make sure that, again, you have tools to be able to manage, any issues or needs that come up. Deployment, for example, if you see a kiddo's having a hard time, better understanding what they're going through just gives you better strategies to help them. So that is a free training that we offer. It's 5 courses, 5 modules, takes an hour and 23 minutes to complete. And we are looking at adding another module that's really focused more on kids. So if there's interest there, please let us know. And any organization that completes the training gets certificates and recognition and badges and window clings and many other things, and also a lot of appreciation from the military community. Next slide, please. So one project I wanted to let you all know of is something that we're doing called Safer Communities Montana. You may have heard about it on the radio, but let me tell you about the problem first. So we know that 63% of all suicides in Montana involve a firearm for both youth and adults. We also know all those kiddos that died between 2012 and 2017 in Lewis and Clark County. Every single one of those kids used a firearm. All of those firearms belonged to family members except for one where it was the individual's own firearm. We also know that if you use a firearm, there's a 93% chance of death versus pretty much anything else is a 3 to 11% chance of death. So again, it's really important that these things are locked up. On the flip side of that, we know that 70 to 90% of all suicide attempts involve medication. So again, we want to make sure that families have the tools they need to lock these things up. And really the greatest gift that we can give to people in an acute suicidal crisis is time. One, because if they don't have access during that acute crisis, we're less likely to lose them. Also, if they have a chance to think about what they're doing, a lot of times they will not want to follow through. So for example, if you had someone who wanted to overdose and they had a blister pack of pills and they had to take the time of popping each one out, as they were wanting to make this attempt, they have a lot of time to think about what they're doing. It really goes against our survival instincts. So locking things up, slowing things down, best thing we can do. And I can tell you a story that Carl Roston, our state suicide prevention coordinator, often shares about a young woman who decided to take her life. She drove out into a field, took a bunch of alcohol, took a bunch of pills, 20 minutes later started to feel sick, called mom, ended up in Shodair. It's scary. A suicide attempt is very scary. And again, it goes against our natural instincts. So time is our friend. Let's know there are lots of myths and misconceptions about firearms and suicide. Often when I've passed out gun locks at East Helena schools, for example, I would hear stories from parents about how, they hid their firearms, so that was enough, or that they've had a conversation with their young people saying, hey, don't ever touch this without me being present. But when suicide is on the table, all of that flies out the window, and we want to make sure they don't have access. So that's why it's really important that we have these conversations with families when we are worried about a young person. And the truth is that safe storage saves lives. So going back to that CALM training, we're happy to get that for you so you know how to navigate these conversations so that families are just safer, and so are our students. Next slide, please. So the Safer Communities Montana project is being run by an AmeriCorps Vista at this point. Her name is Carolyn Patterson. I'm running long, so I'm going to hurry up. And it focuses on collaboration with the firearm and pharmaceutical communities to empower the entire community to be able to prevent suicide. So gun shops, firing ranges, pharmacies, families, everyone has the information they need. We're providing gun locks and Deterra, which are drug deactivation systems. We're happy to share materials. And if you want to collaborate with us, we can absolutely start looking at creating some youth-focused materials. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is postvention. So postvention is defined as activities developed by, with, or for suicide survivors in order to facilitate recovery after suicide and to prevent adverse outcomes, including suicidal behaviors. This includes reducing possibilities of contagion. Now, I know that all of the schools in our state have access to the Montana Crisis Action School Toolkit on Suicide, but I know with toolkits, they often tend to gather dust. I know that's certainly the case with me sometimes. So we want to make sure that you are familiar with this resource and the steps that you can take if there is a suicide death. We want to make sure that you're prepared and ready to go if this does occur, because we know that these things do happen. We also are starting a project called Lost Team, where it's going to be teams of people will respond directly to the scene of a suicide based on a notification from the coroner's office, so we can provide direct support to the families, make sure they have connection to resources. We'll also be providing some information to the schools. There's also a CISM, a critical incident stress management team through Shodair Children's Hospital. I know it was being run by Michelle Marshall, but I'm not entirely sure of its status, but we'll look into that for you. And then the Montana Cast S Toolkit link is in the resource page. So I'm going to stop talking at this point because our next speaker is Julie Burr, who is going to tell you about the Connect referral system and 211. My apologies for going over.
All right, thanks, Jess. So I want to briefly talk about Connect and 211 resources and referral systems really designed to make your lives easier. From that beginning slide, that beginning poll, we know that, you know, some of you are, it takes a little time to figure out the resources, and folks know some resources, but not all. You don't need to store them all in your head, but I want you to know where to find things. So first is 211. So this is run by the United Ways here in Montana. There's a website, montana211.org. You can also call 211 from any phone, and it'll take you to a locally staffed call center here in Montana. Free to use by anyone, statewide resources. As you can see in the screenshot here, you can search by city that you're looking for, and then by category of what type of services. So again, this is available to you, available to families and students, any of that. The other one I want to talk about is Connect, which you all may have heard about before if you've been in Helena for a while, formerly called the Helena Consented Referral System. If you've been here long enough to know it by the previous name, know that it looks a lot better than what it did at that point. So it's a web-based referral system for providers. It is a provider-to-provider system where you can send referrals on behalf of your students. You'll get the parents' permission on it. The receiving provider will call that family instead of that family having to reach out, because that can always be a lot. And then you're able to track the outcomes of if they got referred. So again, the benefits, you'll be able to refer directly to other providers. You can search by location of the provider, service type, the insurance, if you're looking for a private practice therapist, things like that. So we've got resources here in Helena and the wider area, as well as throughout the state. What we're working on for therapists is you being able to see really easily if a provider is taking new clients or not. You can already see this, and I'm always trying to add more therapists. So this can take that 20 minutes of searching off of your plate. Again, you can follow the client's engagement and services. You know if they got looped in at the beginning or not. So real fast, if you want to learn more, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you. I'd love to get this set up in schools so you all have these resources to easily connect families. My info's on the resource sheet that we'll send out. What we would do next is set up a time to chat. We can set up a training with you and any other counselors in your school. You'd get your approval from principal or superintendent, however you need to play it in your area, to set this up, whoever needs to be that higher up giving the permission. And I'll set you up on Connect and make sure you know all the ins and outs of how to search for providers, how to send the referral, how to see what happened. And that is the super quick and dirty of Connect. And I will pass it over to Bob Funk with the Awareness Network.
Hold on one second, Julie.
Yes.
One thing to share about the Connect referral system, Julie always knows that I say this, but it takes all the pressure off of the family so they don't have to lift that 500-pound phone. And it just makes it a lot easier for them to get connected to services. And I know from doing AmeriCorps service at East Helena schools that they would review a list every year of providers to see if they were available or not. And it was really frustrating for them. So this cuts that down. All right, so Bob Funk from the Awareness Network is going to tell you about his awesome nonprofit, and we're going to go ahead and let you do that, Bob.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Had some mic issues today, so yes. Okay. First, I just wanted to thank you, everyone on this call, for the work that you do, because I'm just so grateful. You do incredibly difficult but incredibly important work, and we're very grateful for that. Awareness Group Network is a group of people that, you know, aren't like experts in mental health like you all are, but we want to make it easier for you to deliver your services. We have a couple of key parts of our mission. The first is creating awareness around anxiety disorders and depression and suicide prevention. We're very lucky to work with Lewis and Clark County on helping promote the QPR trainings, and we're really excited to be working with them to for the loss teams to cover the cost of treatment for anyone looking for grief counseling. In addition to that, we also work with groups that examine and bring awareness to the link between poverty and income inequality and mental health disorders, specifically anxiety and depression. But the reason I'm on this call is to basically, we are here to make your life a little bit easier. And we do everything from, if you need workbooks, or any other materials, including apps, whatever that are maybe cost prohibitive, or, you know, you just don't have it in your budget, we will cover those. We will send them to you, whatever you need. Almost every day we get requests for one of our CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy books that we put out on our website. So please get in contact with us if you need anything like that. But to a much larger extent, and something that might be a little more interesting to you all is we assist low-income families who can't pay the out-of-pocket costs for therapies and counseling and other mental health care services. We don't really ask any questions. We don't ask for necessarily proof of income or anything like that. If you go to our website, and I'll put this in the chat, of course, there's a simple form, Awareness Network, on awarenessnetwork.org, but this is Julie's great work. We are also part of Connect. So really, if you have a kid whose family is unable to pay for those services because of the gap in insurance or any other reason, that's what we're here for. We really want to eliminate as many barriers to treatment as possible. We know that the two largest barriers to treatment are stigma. So that's obviously why we do awareness. And then the second is cost. So that's why we try to cover as many costs as possible. So just again, I want to thank you for everything you're doing in the schools. Again, please contact us if you need any materials, or if you know of a family that's in need of financial assistance. Again, I'll put our website in there. It's awarenessnetwork.org, or you can just shoot me an email. I'll put this in there too, but that's bob@awarenessnetwork.org. And I'll also put my phone number in there too. So reach out at any time. We just really appreciate everything you do, and we're trying to make your job a little bit easier.
Thank you, Bob. Awareness Network is really like the undiscovered jewel of Lewis and Clark County, because they provide the funding for those services. I mean, it really limits a really crucial barrier to access, and they're underutilized. So you should also know that they are on the Connect referral system. So that should make your lives easier too. So thank you so much for that, Bob. Next, we are going to hear from Kaylee Verhulst. Did I slaughter your last name?
No, you got it right.
Yay! Thank you, Kaylee.
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't make a slideshow. My nurses have been out sick, so I'm kind of going to just go in a hurry. But so I'm from Shodair's outpatient services. So Shodair Children's Hospital, I'm sure all of you are familiar with. We opened an outpatient program about 3 years ago. Since then, we've been able to open clinics in Bozeman, Missoula, and Butte, as well as the one we have here in Helena. So we're able to see kids for medication management. We see them through a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist. We also have therapy, speech therapy, OT, nutrition, and medication education through a psychiatric nurse. We are able to really expand our access of care. So that's kind of the big thing is we of course are just here. We have, you know, a building you can come into, but if you're someone who can't get a ride here or you're in school and maybe you have an hour, you can go out to your car for lunch, you can always Zoom with our providers. We take kids from the age of 13 or 3 up until, I want to say that we have an age that we stop, but we have never turned anyone down. So we see like 50-year-olds for both therapy and medication management. And one thing we're really starting to focus on is trying to teach a whole family and do a family model. And so that includes, we get a kiddo that is really struggling and their family seems to be really struggling. We might have the parents see a therapist for a month or two to talk about kind of their own trauma or how to navigate having a child who has a severe mental illness. Groups are kind of our new thing that we're really trying to get into. We put them on hold for a little bit for the summer, but once school starts back up, we will have a weekly support group for kids 12 and over. And depending on the need, we try to keep them small. So we usually do about 6 kids, but depending on the need, we'll do multiple groups. We do have the LGBTQ support group. So that's for members of that community and also for people who are just trying to be allies or trying to be more aware, which is led by Dr. Kelly Haugen. She's a clinical psychologist and has a lot of training with that population. And we will be starting those again once school starts. We also have a free group through the innovation grant through the University of Montana that helps us to teach kids in high school who are going to transition into adulthood, basic life skills plus how to continue your mental health treatment. And through that grant, we also try to do parent engagement. So another barrier for care is if you don't have gas to get here or if your parents don't have gas to bring you. So we're able to provide gift cards for gas. We provide some things for food. We also, a giant barrier is just getting kids in the door. So for that group in particular, we kind of bribe them and buy them Starbucks or give them gift cards for joining. But then once they're here, we've had really great opportunities to teach them. And we also have that group taught by a past patient of Shodair who just turned 18. So instead of adults getting up and telling kids what they want to know, we have someone their own age who also struggles with bipolar disorder talk about becoming an adult while living with a mental illness. One exciting thing is that Shodair just became the first hospital in Montana to be certified as a trauma-informed hospital. So that is through Andrus Institute and the Sanctuary Institute. So we've been in the process of getting certified for 5 years with that, which really allows us now to kind of bring Sanctuary into the community to teach people some of the tools we have, to teach parents about trauma-informed care, and to kind of have a united language between providers and parents and kids. And then Shodair is also working with another organization to pilot going into schools to perform assessments. So the PHQ-9, the GAD-7, and the Columbia scale. We would do that on any kid whose family gave them permission. Once we had permission, they would take those assessments. And if they came back with any sort of risk or it looked like they needed care, we would contact their family and get them set up for outpatient services, either through us or somewhere else, but just make sure that if there's any indication that they could need further follow-up, that we're getting them set up with someone. And then kind of like just talked about, we are also gifting bags that include medication lock bags and gun locks for anyone who wants one. They don't have to be a patient here. And then another thing too is just a lot of education with families. We have a free parent support group once a week that's virtual. Again, your child doesn't have to be a patient at Shodair for you to join. And that's led by one of our very experienced LCPCs to just talk about, you know, managing your emotions while managing a child who has a mental illness. And then of course, just for access to care, we have a really robust foundation where we are able to really give people a lot of discounts if they can't afford the care here. So that's called Show Care. It's really easy and people can get a really good idea of what their bill would be just by going onto the Show Care website and looking at the Show Care application. It's all based off of income. And then Show Care also does take all insurances if people are worried about that. And Show Care can be applied to any out-of-pocket expenses after insurance. So that is just kind of all the things we have in our outpatient services. And then of course we still have our residential and acute units upstairs. I think.
Yep, I'm always muted. Thank you for that. And would love for you to share the information for the support groups in the chat box if you're willing to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So the next person we're going to have speak, well, people, Kelsey Harriman and Jordan Hinshaw from Youth Dynamics.
Hello. Thanks for having us join today. So we just wanted to provide a brief overview of some of the services that Youth Dynamics has. I asked Kelsey to kind of hop on with us because she is the area manager for the Helena outpatient services. And so as far as localized outpatient services, she can speak a little bit better to that than I can. I'm going to speak a little bit more on the residential services that we have to offer. Across the state of Montana, we've got 10 therapeutic group home placements. Each house is licensed for up to 8 children, and they vary on age ranges. We have here in Helena a group home called Lewis and Clark Group Home. Some of you may be familiar with it just based on the kids being in public school. And the youngest that we're licensed for that specific home is 8. And then we're licensed up to 18, but we generally stick within the ages of the kids in the current milieu. So like right now, the oldest kid we have, I think, is 14. And then we also have a campus down in Boulder. So we've got 4 homes down there, 2 female homes and 2 male homes. One of the male homes is specifically for highly sexualized youth. And so we have an MSOTA therapist on site that works with them along with also treating their mental health at the same time. And we also have the ability to provide addiction services for the youth in the group homes in Boulder. Specific and unique to our group home settings is all of our group homes children go to public school, with the exception of the campus in Boulder. We do have a day treatment program there. So we have the flexibility to be able to keep the kids on site and you know, put in specific safety measures and protocols if we need to, if they're struggling in public school and that's the level of care that they need. That's a really brief overview of the services that we offer. In general, I'll let Kelsey kind of speak to the services on the outpatient side.
So on the outpatient side, we can offer therapy, both individual and family. We also have case management and in-home support services, which case management kind of provides like advocacy and resource connecting for our clients and their families. And then in-home support is kind of intensive support services that can kind of help keep the kids in a home, kind of use as preventative measures, or if like a kid is coming back from a group home, or if they were in foster care and coming back to a home, then it kind of just provides that extra wraparound. We also have a family support assistant, which is like a big brother, big sister. It can be a mentorship for our kiddos. We also have addictions counseling on the outpatient level. We have multiple addictions counselors throughout the state, and so that either can be telehealth or in person. And then, am I missing anything? Therapeutic foster care. Oh, and then we have therapeutic foster care. So our kiddos in the therapeutic foster care are just maybe higher level than like the state homes. And so our therapeutic foster parents have a little bit more intense training so that they can just provide more support in the home for that kid, so that hopefully they don't need to go to higher level of care. And I think that's all of them.
No, that covers it.
So that's a pretty brief rundown of them all.
Thank you so much for that. Let me start my video again. Sorry about that. Thank you, ladies. We really appreciate your sharing information about YDI. So the last thing we're going to do before we get into our question portion of the presentation is we're going to review the resource sheet that Julie created and has shared in Zoom. Do you mind sharing it visually for us?
Yep, and I'm just updating it to actually be a live living Google Doc. So share the new link in the chat in a minute, and then this will, when we add new resources, you'll be able to keep accessing this if you bookmark this link.
Lovely, thank you. So the first page is the crisis lines, the crisis text line, not answered in Montana. But if you text MT to 741-741, kids can receive, well, anyone can receive immediate support for a variety of different crisis situations. Honestly, if they wanted to, they could go sneak off into a bathroom stall and get support and no one would be the wiser. Answer 24/7, completely free, really great program. And they also use, I don't know the right word for the technology, but they're able to focus on certain words to prioritize people who are sending messages to them. So for example, like if they type in aspirin, that is one of the fastest responses that they will get. Also, there is the Montana Crisis Recovery Line. This was created specifically for people whose mental health is impacted by COVID. It is available Monday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And the number is listed there. Suicide Prevention Lifeline will be a 3-digit number starting in July of 2022, but the original number will always be good. They're available 24/7. It is answered by one of 3 call centers in Montana, unless the call volume is so high that it has to go to another state. But we find it very important that Montanans talk to Montanans, because you know how much fun it is to call Verizon and have them call Helena. And then what you should know about the Suicide Prevention Lifeline: it's there if you need advice. It's there if you're struggling. It's there if you want to help someone who's struggling. You can call them at the same time and they will help you. The Trevor Project LGBTQ Crisis Line, the number is listed there, specifically for youth who are LGBTQ. Trans Lifeline, trans-led organization that connects trans people to community support and resources. The number is listed there as well. Awareness Network, we heard about scholarships for youth to receive mental health services. You go to their website, awarenessnetwork.org, to fill that form out. And then Center for Mental Health does see youth. Connect referral system, which Julie talked to you about. It is a really great way to get people connected to services. You're able to track whether or not they did engage. And it also helps you to see what insurance each provider takes, as well as whether or not they're available to take new clients, so you don't spend a bunch of time on one particular provider if they're just simply not available for the young people you're taking care of. Elevate Montana does provide that ACEs education. We also have Girls Thrive, so they do work with young women. It's to promote self-confidence, self-esteem, and positive body image. When we were talking about those self-help and other support strategies, this is one of those programs where youth can have time with other like-minded kids, where they have a chance to feel connected and take a breath, a moment away from whatever's bothering them. It's really important. Excellent program, by the way. Helena Indian Alliance, they have their medicated assisted treatment program. They're running the Native Connections grant, and you can definitely contact Linda for more information, who's also works with Mental Health America, by the way. And so they manage the mental health warm line. Again, it's not available 24/7, but if someone is dealing with a mental health challenge, but it is not at a crisis level, this is a great number to call to talk to other peers. NAMI Montana has a variety of different programs that are very helpful. Ones that I especially like and promote are Family to Family. It is a really great program on being an advocate for your loved one who's dealing with a mental health challenge, whether that's at the doctor's office or in day-to-day life. That's to help you to figure out those strategies and to better understand prevalent mental health challenges. Show Dare Outpatient, we talked about. suicide prevention trainings. They're all free. Please feel free to contact me to get some education or to talk about needs in the community. It's for parents as well as for you. And also we do promote the Signs of Suicide program. If any of you need help on facilitating that, we're happy to assist you in that program. And then the Montana Action Crisis Toolkit and the After Suicide Toolkit for Schools through the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Tobacco prevention provides cessation help designed for youth. And Taylor did talk about that, as well as Youth Connections about youth alcohol and marijuana prevention. Youth Dynamics we just heard from, and I think that is what we have on the sheet. Was there anything else that you wanted me to say, Julie, that I missed? That was a very fast, rough and dirty. Okay, all right, so no, okay. So the next thing we're going to do is a couple of discussion questions. So if you would share that slide for us, Julie.
Just one moment. Too many things open, hold on.
Next slide. There we go. Thank you. So the first question that we have for all of you is, what are your concerns for this school year? What are you expecting? What are you worried about? And you're welcome to participate via chat or to just press your space bar and temporarily unmute yourself and share.
Stop sharing so we can all see each other, and I'll put the questions in the chat.
Okay. Do you expect this to be a normal school year? Is there anything things you're worried about? Mary, I know you well. Do you have any concerns for this year? Social anxiety seems to be on the rise, yeah.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, yeah, it took a while to figure this out. I haven't been on a Zoom call since last spring. Yeah.
That must be lovely.
I know. I think all of us have concerns, but I shouldn't speak for everyone. I just feel like right now we don't know enough to know what to be concerned about. And so I appreciate you guys taking time. What would be super helpful, like my biggest anxiety at the beginning of every year is a list of therapists that are taking patients right now. And I know like that Connect, I remember it's just not updated frequently enough for us to, it felt like when we've used it before, it hasn't been very helpful because parents are still not getting connected. So the more therapists, the more, the more up-to-date resource, like that's the one thing, if there was one thing I would be begging for, it would be a list, like maybe monthly, a list of therapists that have room. Because I think all of us, that's a big concern, is we have a lot of kids in need and the waiting lists are 3 months long. And so that's the biggest concern for me as far as mental health.
Thank you for that, Mary.
Emily Hilliard, I don't know if, people are talking about the impacts of COVID, but even grief with COVID. And I guess the other thing would be just managing everyone's feelings around COVID and helping to be able to respect parents' wishes, but also keeping our kids safe, and how to manage those conversations, I guess, is something that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, how do I go into classes and and help manage those conversations, especially when we don't even know what we're dealing with yet.
Absolutely. Regarding the grief comment, grief in terms of just the change and the grieving over the changes in our lives, or grief over losing a loved one?
I think both.
Okay.
Thank you, whoever said both, yeah.
I wonder if one resource that would be helpful for those who've lost a loved one would be the Tamarack Grief Resource Center, and they're in Missoula and some other areas of the state, not here, but they do telehealth. They also do grief camps for kids, and that's something we could definitely get some information for you all regarding grief with COVID. Let us get back to you on that and see if there's anything out there. But thank you so much for sharing that. Julie, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to address Emily's earlier question about, or just a comment about the financial hardship, and also speak to Mary's point about therapists. Mary, I might follow up with you later about that piece, if you're willing. And we will do our best to try to see what we can do on that end with Connect. But we do have in Connect a lot of the local social services that do assist with financial hardships in various ways. We've got your Good Sam, your Salvation Army, things like that on Connect. Since those are a little easier to keep updated. So those are all out there. 211 is a great place to look for resources. If you have, and if there's specific things you're getting stuck on finding, you can ping us. And I know Jess and I have done this for others, and that we're happy to help do some digging. And sometimes we can get, we're on enough committee meetings that eventually someone will know a resource, or we'll just get to the point where we know something's not free or not like available here. But there's a lot of stuff that we don't, it's just not super public, which is why we're trying to bring all these resources to attention. Kelsey, thanks so much. Oh, looks like I missed you there. Yeah, keep the questions coming. We want to take the last 5 minutes to talk about follow-ups, but we've got another 10 minutes or so for more questions and discussion.
Did you want to give everyone a little bit more time for this first question, or should we move on to the next? Let's move on to the next question. Hold on. The next question was, what are your experiences like referring students to services? What barriers are you running into, or what successes are you seeing?
I think piggybacking off of Mary, there's just availability. That's probably our hardest, our biggest hurdle. Knowing who has availability when it comes to therapy specifically, but now all of these resources compiled together, it's a nice place to go back and find something. So I appreciate that. But yeah, availability for therapists.
Lovely. 211's great, but it talks more about the organizations rather than individual therapists. But I can tell you that that thing is updated at least every 6 months. And so there is that. And is there anything else that we can do in terms of that availability piece, Julie? Or that Connect addresses?
I think let's keep talking about it. I think I'd like to reach out to some of the private practice therapists and see from there on how we can collaborate.
Thank you for that. Any other challenges or successes when it comes to referring students and families? Okay, all right. Well, then the last thing. Oh, I see. A biggest barrier is often a lack of parent support and consent. Jamie, do you mind telling us a little bit more about that? I see incredible successes when students and families engage in therapy. Okay, so the two barriers that we often run into are finances or you know, what Bob said earlier, and that is stigma. A lot of parents aren't ready to accept that their young person might be dealing with a mental health challenge. So when that happens, how do you navigate that? And do you unpack that and find out what exactly it is that they're stuck on?
This is Jamie. Sorry, it took me a while to figure out how to unmute.
No worries.
You know, I've had some students that I've had to have the same conversation with parents over and over and over. And then eventually, not always, but eventually some of them will become more open to treatment or therapy. So sticking with it. I mean, a lot of times, probably the most, and I think other counselors, school counselors have experienced this as well, is when you have that initial conversation, it's met with a lot of anger and hostility. And I mean, oftentimes school personnel hear things like, you know, do your job, you take care of them, they don't do this at home, you know, kind of the blaming the school for the situations. But I've had a number of parents where you just have to keep having the same conversation repeatedly before they're ready to engage or be open with a referral.
Do you think that there's anything that we could do on our side to prepare you for those conversations or give you tools?
I don't know. I think just more of the awareness and stigma busting campaigns in our communities. I mean, I think we are finding more and more families. I've noticed the difference from the early years of my career to now. Some of these conversations are going a lot more smoothly than they used to. So I think that all of the advocacy and the work that's been done about awareness and busting stigma, you know, has definitely helped.
So more community level projects.
I think so myself.
Can I add to that too? I think that any promotion of like CSCTs in schools where we have community-based therapists in our schools really, really makes a big difference, because that access for students becomes so much more eligible and so easy that for one of me, like there's a lot of debate, you know, a lot of going on in discussion about CSCT and that program and how it's supported and funded in Montana. And I think one of the things that we really have to do as therapists is promote those CSCT programs and therapists or CSCs who aware therapist-based programs in schools.
Are there enough CSCTs, or is it that families aren't aware of the service, or where's the soft spot there?
I think both probably. And not only that, we can get the funding, but then it's hard to get the therapist in because that's a huge issue in Montana in general. So you can get the funding, but then the experiences are lacking because of that. So I think anytime we can validate, you know, promote and show that success and support them in any way that we can, it's going to include success, hopefully.
Thank you for that, Crystal. Any other comments or questions on this particular topic?
I was just wondering if there would be opportunities for, parents to hear from other parents. I would say the parents that I've had the hardest time with who are struggling with stigma, you know, they may be heard. In both cases, I'm thinking a staff member opened up about their own struggle with their own child. And then suddenly it felt tangible and real because it was coming from someone they trusted, or maybe, you know, someone who's not the school counselor. So I don't know if there would be an opportunity to create some sort of like once a month thing where, you know, we could direct parents to say, you know, someone's going to be sharing their experience about supporting their child's mental health, journey, and it could be valuable for you to hear. So I don't know if anything like that exists right now.
Not that I'm aware of, but doesn't mean we can't work on it.
Right.
Actually,
That is just, sorry. I just feel like in the two most challenging instances I had, the breakthrough came from hearing from someone who they trusted, who actually had gone through it.
so Rebecca's already off, but Zach and I and Rebecca, along with the Early Childhood Coalition, have been working to try to develop community cafes for parents. And there's a framework called, I'm going to mess this up, but I think it's called Building Protective Factors or something along those lines. And our biggest struggle right now is getting parents involved, because the idea behind it is that there's parent leaders who lead the groups and then parents attend. And there's kind of questions that we kind of predetermine to ask, like, what are your needs? Where are there gaps in services? Basically, a lot of the stuff you mentioned, just like, what are you guys struggling with? Is there anything us as parents can come together to find a solution for? Or so we're working on that. We had one event this summer, and we're trying to get those up and running, so I can keep you guys informed if we are successful in getting those off the ground.
I also wonder with Shodare's outpatient services, the support groups, since you have one for parents, if there'd be some way to extend that to have more of that peer support from the parents, and if it could be wrapped in with the community cafes as well.
I don't see Kaylee still on, but I think that's, we can reach out to her. Jamie just suggested NAMI, and I was going to say that maybe there's a conversation there.
Okay.
This is Jamie.
Yeah.
I have participated in the NAMI Family to Family, which is incredible. It's great if you have an adult child, a sibling, a parent, but they do have a group, and I don't remember the name, that I've heard fabulous things about. I can only say that 12-week class for Family to Family was amazing. So I would assume that the one that's designed for school age, parents with school age children, they help families create a crisis binder and resources, and then support group. I don't know. I haven't, again, firsthand attended it, but I've heard some good things from other parents.
We'd be happy to look into it and get that information to all of you and see if it is. Jimmy, do you know if that was offered specifically in Helena?
It was. It
Okay.
was. Yeah. And again, I don't know. I mean, that would be worth a call to the NAMI office to talk to Colleen or Matt or somebody. I mean, if we could, as a school, at the schools, get on a mailing list, where they email us every time that class is being offered, we could put a poster in our waiting areas or whatever. I used to get a lot of emails about Family to Family, and I would forward it along to all the counselors, but I haven't seen information about the child, parenting children group in a long time.
We'd be happy to look into that and also have some conversations about maybe how we can connect our different programs to provide maybe some more peer support for families. Because I think what was shared earlier about how it's really helpful if they see other people doing it, it kind of normalizes it, makes them feel like they're not alone or isolated. I think that's a really fantastic idea. So we can definitely look into that as a team and see what shakes loose. So it is 2:29, everyone. So it looks like we're not going to have time for any other general questions, but if you fill out the form that is at the bit.ly Lunch and Learn August 11th. Julie, do you mind sharing it in the chat box one more time? From there, you can select to be added to the Lunch and Learn list, get a copy of the resource sheet emailed to you, and receive a link to today's recording. Also, that'll help us to gather your information to share this with you. We were planning on putting the recording for the video on the LCPH YouTube account, as well as the website that is run for the Lewis and Clark Suicide Prevention Coalition. That website is lcsuicideprevention.org. Also, if you are interested in getting more involved in suicide prevention or mental health work, please let us know. We are always happy to work with community members because we're only as strong as our community is, and we should work together to make these changes. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time. And if you want some more information or you want your colleagues to attend the next one, we are planning a training in October. Excuse me, not a training, a lunch and learn in October. We're just figuring out dates right now. And if you have any preferences, please let us know. We're trying to make sure that everyone and anyone that is involved in counseling can get this info too. Also, if you have any input, that form that Julie created and put the link for, there is space to do that as well. Julie, anything else you want to say before we get going?
Thank you all for attending. Jess and I will stick on for a minute if anyone has other questions.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time today.